Hi folks, today we're going to talk about restoring a Sessions mission clock. This clock actually was my grandfather's and hung on his wall for many years. After that, it was in my mom's kitchen and it hasn't ran for over 30 years. So since I inherited it, a try on restoring and getting it back running. So we'll talk a little bit about the components, what I purchased, and how I got it running. And since I've mounted it on my wall in the office, it's been over a month. So let's get started. So here are the things I purchased from Amazon. I purchased some suspension springs rods, set of 5. That was $14. It looks like the one that I had in the clock, somebody tried to make one out of brass steel, so it was too much tension. I purchased the cleaning agent for the ultrasonic cleaner, so I'll put those links down in the description as well. For parts, I found a movement that looked exactly like the movement I had. There seems to be 2 different types for the session clock. One with the half hour that uses the bong circuit, which is the one I had. And then there's also another one that looks like it has a bell on the back. So make sure you get the right model number as close as possible for the look that you have for your clock as well. So I actually found that on eBay for $40 for parts. In addition, you'll also need some tools. So a thin pair of long needle nose pliers, hex nut driver to remove the nuts from the casing, just some other random tools, flashlight, tweezers, things that you can manipulate small parts with. Let's talk about the clock side. There is a verge, an escape wheel, and many other parts. It's important before you start to take many pictures from the front, side, back, underside, right side, left side. Take as many pictures as you possibly can. The first picture is actually of the movement I purchased on eBay. As you can see, it's fairly cruddy. The first thing I tried was to wash each of the movements assembled in the sonic washer. That worked somewhat. It did get a lot of the crud off, but as I looked further, I decided to go ahead and disassemble one. So as you can see, all the parts here from the first clock movement I took apart, and I compared each part to the spare parts I had in the old clock or the new clock, and compared what I wanted to use. It turned out for the plates that hold all the gears and the assemblies, I decided to use the plates of the purchased clock. They seem to be a little bit better shape. Even though they're more dirty, the holes that hold the gears were round. On my original clock, some of those holes had elongated, which causes the clock to stop. So that was one of the symptoms I was looking for, why the clock would not run. Some hints when you're taking apart or assembling it. Wind the torsion springs as much as you can and zip tie them together as tight as you can get that zip tie around those torsion springs. And then operate that clock or the bong side until the spring expands fully into the zip tie. That'll stop it from expanding quickly, or as you take your gears out, there's nothing there left to hold the clock, other part clocks and the gears from running very quickly, which could strip out your gears. Also, when you're putting it back, those torsion springs back, there is a little latch on the gears as illustrated in this picture. Make sure that wire is engaged in the little catch and it's forcing that latch into the gear. When you wind the clock, that's actually what you're hearing clicking, is that latch coming up and clicking into each of those different things as you wind the gears up and that tension spring up. That's really important. If you don't check that and you cut that zip tie, it'll immediately expand, and again, you'll risk stripping out your gears. So that's really important to understand how to do that. When you're disassembling, you're going to start from the top. Once you take the verge hook off, there's nothing there on the clock side to stop it from running. So I put a little bar through the top gear. Likewise on the bong side, the same thing with the top fan gear. Once you remove that, all the gears will run because there's nothing to stop it. So just be cautious when you're assembling or disassembling to make sure that you have things in place that won't let the gears run wild. When you're disassembling, you go from the top down, and when you assemble, you're going to start with the torsion springs and work up on both sides. It's best if you can do both sides at the same time. To do the clock side and then the bonger side, it gets a little tricky. But it is doable if you want to work and see if you can get the clock side working first before you work on your bong or your bell side. The other thing that's noted, if you look at these little bars, I have the verge hook removed. These are actually movable. They're on a little rivet hinge. This is really important as you work on the clock. They need to be aligned. That is really how you move the verge hook in and out. The other thing is the verge hook must be straight. I noticed someone was on mine have tried to bend them to engage it better into the escape wheel. It needs to be straight, 90 degrees, and then that verge wire has to come out at a 90-degree angle. That will help keep your swing equal on both sides, so keep your pendulum working. And then you move those little torsion bars back and forth. I used a little screwdriver and I pried them up, or I tapped them back down. I found somewhere in all my research that it should engage the escape wheel at about the same angle that the teeth are pointing to, which turned out to be about 30 degrees or so, and then a depth of about a 1/2 of the teeth size. It doesn't have to go all the way down in the teeth on each side. About half on each side is what got my clock working. Let's take a look at the bong side. There's a couple key ingredients and components that make it work. One, of course, you have the gears and the suspension frame that drives it. It's totally independent from the clock side. There's a bong counterbar in gear, and on that gear you'll notice there's shallow valleys between the teeth, and then there's some long slots. You'll also notice that there's some stop bars and a stop gear. These work together. So for example, when the hour hand swings around, you'll notice in the middle of the two plates there is this lever that lifts those bars up. Once they're up high enough, it'll let that stop wheel spin halfway around. That's a primer. And then once it lifts it up high enough, it'll allow it to run. So the counter bar will strike those valleys until it gets to the next long slot. Once it enters the long slot, it raises that stop bar up high enough to catch that post on the stop gear. There's also wires on the bonger bars, as you can see here in this picture, that's tied up to the higher post that provides some tension. That tension makes the bars swing down or up and engage the gears appropriately. Without those wires, it'll be hit or miss. So you got to make sure there's wires are on those bars, wrapped up to the top bar, that's pulling on them a little bit. Not too tight, else you won't be able to lift the bars off the gears. So that's really the crux of the bonging circuit. You have a counter bar gear that's just on the other side of your compression spring gear. You have the stop bar you see here in the bottom lower right, the stop bar and stop gear. If you look down past that large post, right past the arrow, that is that stop post that is on that gear that comes out. And you can see that bar is attached all the way back to the same bar that your counter bar is attached to. So those two work in conjunction. I hope that works. So let's take a look and see it in action. And there you go. Well, there you go. I hope that helps you fix your clock. Don't forget to like the video and comment below. Thanks a lot.